It's Tuesdays, the Raw Leadership Talk. Glad to invite you. Welcome to the Raw Leadership Talk on this 8th of June 2021. Today we are looking at leadership on the law, featuring legal counsel Salem Lorot from the Parliament of Kenya. And we are glad that you are joining us. Where are you joining us from? We'll be glad to hear from you. It's going to be a very, very interesting discussion today, even as we listen to George Frederick Handel, one of my favorite classic musicians that I studied when I was doing music in school. Listen to the water music, the music that used to be played for kings as they were swimming. How joyful they should have been listening to this kind of music. Where are you joining us from? We'll be glad to hear from you. Are you joining us from Nairobi? Are you joining us from other parts of Kenya? Are you joining us from outside Kenya? Just let us know. Tito Kunyuk says there's some other noise. Let's reduce the music a little bit. I hope, Tito, now you can hear us clearly. In a moment, we shall begin our discussion today as we look at leadership on the law. And our guest, Salem Lorot, is set to expound on this aspect of leadership on the law. Caroline Wanga joining us. Thank you for being here. Says, my people, I salute you. Thank you very much. We are glad you are here. Where are you joining us from? Thank you very much. So we go to the discussion of the day. Salem, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Dan.
How has your week begun so far?
So far, so good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad.
Good to be here. And our viewers, wherever you're joining us from today, we are looking at leadership and the law. How does the law impact on leadership? And how does leadership also impact on the law? And maybe specifically looking also into leaders and the law, because leadership is the process, leaders are the people. And so to help us expound on that is legal counsel Salem Lorot from the Parliament of Kenya, right in Nairobi, joining us to help us in this particular discussion. Salem, do you think leaders like the law?
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. First, probably we'll need to be clear about who leaders are in this conversation.
Yes.
Who do we refer to?
Yes.
And probably I'll want to imagine that you might mean political leaders, because you have various kinds of leaders. We have religious leaders, we have economic leaders, we have political leaders. But for the purpose of this discussion, probably I can narrow myself down to political leaders.
Okay. Even though my first question is simply generally all kind of leaders. Do they really like the law? Whether they are corporate leaders, because we do have corporate law, or we're thinking about even religious leaders. Do they like following the law of the land, specifically, so to say? And it's good that you're narrowing it down to political leadership, because these are the kind of people that you also deal with them a lot. So it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't think that most people like the law. Although law by itself provides certainty, and it's a good thing, but it makes you uncomfortable because there are certain obligations which are placed by law which you must abide by.
Yes.
So you'll find most of the time we might not really like the law, but that's what the law provides. So most of the time we have to obey the law. We might not really like it, but I'll want to imagine that leaders should like the law because it provides certainty. One of the concepts that that is very common is about the rule of law. That if you are certain about law and its application, then you can organize our affairs.
Yes.
So to me, I'll imagine that as leaders, we should like the law.
Even though it may not be so to many leaders.
Yes, and I can just give an example.
Yes.
As an individual, for instance, there are certain tax obligations. There could be certain laws that I must follow. I might not really like. For instance, at this particular month, I'm supposed to do the returns, filling up the forms and all that. And you'll find most of the Kenyans will be really getting busy to follow that law. So you'll find most of the time they might not really like it, but they just find themselves that they have that obligation to follow that law.
Yeah. And do you think then our laws are friendly enough, especially to different leaders, and specifically narrowing our discussion to political leaders, or they are designed to offend them? Because I see an antagonism of some kind between laws and political leaders. They always clash, even though political leaders or members of parliament are the ones who are given the responsibility to make these laws, and then the president will assent to those laws. But again, you see, the same laws become such a hard thing to the same people. So are the laws the problem, or people are the problem?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I don't think that you might correctly categorize the fact that laws are friendly to leaders. And I can just give a number of examples, even from our constitution and various laws. For instance, there are a number of responsibilities which have been placed on leaders. They have high-level responsibilities than ordinary citizens by virtue of them being leaders. And for instance, we can cite a number of examples from our constitution. For instance, we have chapter 6 of the constitution, which provides for leadership and integrity. And it's a short chapter of our constitution with very wide ramifications on leadership. So you'll find when you examine a number of articles under that chapter, chapter 6 of our constitution, you'll find that there are a number of duties and responsibilities placed on a leader. And in this case, you are talking about state officers or public officers. And when you talk about state officers here, we are referring to the state officers as defined under Article 260 of the Constitution. We are talking about the president, the deputy president. We are talking about the members of parliament. We are talking about governors, quite a number of them. And you'll find that from the architecture of chapter 6 of the Constitution, the responsibilities which have been placed on these leaders are quite high. And I can just cite a number of examples. One is that even when they're conducting themselves in their private lives, you cannot, for instance, say that probably I'm in a private setting, then I can lower my guard, and probably those responsibilities not apply to me. The responsibilities will apply to you both in private life and in public life. And your life should inspire public confidence. That is one responsibility. The second responsibility is about avoiding avenues where there is a personal conflict. For instance, if public land, for instance, being sold, or you find yourself selling land that belongs to you for public use, and probably you are holder of that office, and you want to enrich yourself from that arrangement, this is something that Chapter 6 of the Constitution does not sanction. So there are quite a number of provisions when you look at even Chapter 6 of the Constitution, which place high level responsibility on these leaders. And that's just from the architecture of the Constitution. And there are other legislations which also specifically provide for these responsibilities. For instance, out of the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, we have the Leadership and Integrity Act. It reiterates, yes, the provisions which are there in the Constitution, but now it expands on them. It provides further details on them, on how leadership and integrity is supposed to be actualized for these leaders. So there's the Leadership and Integrity Act, there's the Public Officer Ethics Act, we have the Economic Crimes Act, quite a number of legislations which place responsibility on these leaders. And you might not really correctly say that these leaders are special breed. In fact, the responsibilities which have been placed on them are a bit higher. Probably I'll just want to say that for the political leaders, let's say in the parliamentary setting, the members of parliament, we have the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act, which provides for the immunities for members of parliament, but in the exercise of their duties as members of parliament. So that, for instance, if a member of parliament is exercising his or her constitutional role as a member of parliament within the precincts of parliament, then they'll enjoy those immunities, those powers and privileges.
Explain to us a little bit, Salem, on immunity, because the executive, the office of the president, maybe cabinet ministers, I don't know, and members of parliament have enjoyed immunity to some level. Does immunity mean breaking the law, or you are covered even when you break the law? Maybe to Wanjiku, can you demystify this? What does really immunity mean?
So at the broader level, we have the rule of law. We are supposed to obey the law.
Yes, because I've seen sometimes leaders even disregarding court orders, and not following the law. So does the immunity cover such kind of things?
Absolutely not. In fact, the whole purpose of the immunity is to enable you exercise your constitutional function, so that you are able to discharge those functions without fear or favor.
Yes.
In the context of parliament, for a member of parliament, for instance, the immunities that they are enjoying, they will be enjoying it within the precincts of parliament, or if it's outside parliament, it could be in a committee sitting. So that it does not give them the leeway to actually break the law and say, I have this immunity, I have these privileges. Or in that regard, they'll not be covered. And that is the whole essence. So that, for instance, if it's about debate in parliament, for a member of parliament, the member of parliament will be able to freely discuss or debate on the floor of the house without fear. And that's the whole intention. But the intention is that the member of parliament will not actually get out of the precincts of parliament and breach any particular law in the exercise of their own functions as members of parliament. So it is limited to that extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how come then African leaders are so obsessed with changing the law to suit what they want to do? Why is it the problem again? We've seen African leaders changing the law so that they can run another term, or changing the law so that they can be able to do different things, just like we are seeing right now. You know, the constitution, the new constitution here in Kenya, you know, has just been there for around 10 years. But now we want to change it. And people feel it's more about leaders and not about us. Why is it that African leaders are so obsessed with changing the law?
Thank you, Dan. I think it's a loaded question in the sense that most of the time, and this is a phrase or a quote attributed to Lord Acton. He was an English Catholic essayist, writer, and he said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that, for instance, for a leader in holding a political office or a leadership position, most of the time you'll find that you might get bogged down by that power to the extent that probably you might think that there are certain ends which you might not wish really to benefit the members of the public, but probably to advance sectarian or private interest. But broadly speaking, if you look at the architecture of our constitution, the procedures have been clearly spelled out. It's not unlike previously when you had the previous constitution, where these changes could actually be done suddenly, and probably there are no enough safeguards to guard this process. If you look at our progressive constitution, there are enough safeguards for such changes, so that at the middle of all these changes, it is the people who have the sovereign power to ensure that these laws cannot just be changed arbitrarily. But I agree with you that it's not just an African problem. It could be a global problem. That if done, for instance, you are given powers now, you might get clouded and think that you'll stay in that power forever, and that probably you might want to advance some sectarian interests and so on. But from where I sit, there are enough safeguards in our constitution and in our laws to guard against such.
Okay. And do you think the safeguards are helping, or they can be bulldozed and transformed to suit particular interests?
You look at the safeguards, there are a number of levels of these safeguards.
Yes.
And I can just give you an example. In the lawmaking process, there are enough safeguards. By the time a bill of parliament becomes an act of parliament, there are enough safeguards to ensure that, for instance, there is public participation and that these laws reflect the will of the people. So that, for instance, if a member of parliament introduces a legislation and that legislation does not reflect the will of the people, they have an opportunity of submitting their comments on such a legislation. If that fails, the president, when he's about to assent to such a bill, can actually send that legislation back to parliament for consideration in what we call presidential reservations, so that the president can return such a legislation and say, I'm not happy about these particular clauses. Can you have a look at it, reconsider it, and incorporate it, pass it, and bring it back to me so that I can assent to it? That is at the second level. Yes.
In that regard, then, looks like there's a lot of powers that have been vested in the president in vetting the law that is supposed to be passed. So what happens when the interest of the president, the parliament doesn't like it? Is there a way in which also the parliament can advise the president?
Yeah, thank you. Under Article 115, the procedures are clearly outlined under Article 115 of the Constitution. And
Yes.
for Parliament to veto or to disagree with the proposals coming from the president,
Yes.
it requires a 2/3 majority in the House. So you can imagine that number
Okay.
of members of Parliament
Uh-huh.
if they disagree with the proposals, the proposed amendments by
Yeah.
the president, the reservations by the president. So
So
there are
2/3
safeguards.
yeah. And let me ask this. So in the event that we have the 2/3 and who say we want the law to remain as it is and we are against the reservation of the president, does that force the president then to assent to the law, irrespective of the fact that he has his own reservation?
Yes, and that's the good thing about Article 115 of the Constitution. It has that safeguard. So once the number question has been resolved in the Parliament, then the president will not have a say on that. Then it will become an act of Parliament.
Wonderful, wonderful. Barnabas Kwogo Lare, my friend, saying interesting subject, especially at this time. Caroline Wanga, he said, I thought it was just a few clauses in the law which they want changed. I guess that's so, but again, the clauses are many and big. Patrick Simiu says, in view of such safeguards, how do some controversial bill, e.g. security bill, become laws? Maybe, Salem, you may want to take that up. In view of such safeguards, how do some controversial bills, e.g. security bill, becomes law? Caroline Wanga says, such a candid conversation. And Carmen Atieno said, tuned, wonderful program. Thank you very much for tuning in. Keep the questions, observations, and even, ideas coming in this show. But Salem, maybe just to take on Simiu Were's question.
Yes.
It says, in view of such safeguards, how do some controversial bills, e.g. security bill, becomes law?
Thank you, Simiu, for that question. It boils down to the lawmaking process and the issue of public participation. So the first question that we need to ask is, were members of the public invited to submit their comments on that bill before it became an act of Parliament? If the answer is yes, they were given the opportunity, and a parliamentary committee's report reflects that actually there were these comments which had been received by the members of the public, and it's not just enough to indicate that we received these comments. The courts require that you have to really interrogate those comments and find a way of accommodating them, if, for instance, they're justified. So the question will be, if you look at the committee's report and ultimately the committee's amendments and how the bill was enacted and became law, was the public involved in the process? That's the first safeguard. The second safeguard, where a bill, for instance, requires consideration by both houses, is another safeguard, so that if one house passes a certain legislation and is supposed to go to the other house, the members of the public will be given another opportunity to interrogate the same legislation and submit their comments. So it's not lost. That's the second safeguard. The third safeguard is by the president. The president can actually send it back to Parliament for reconsideration. The fourth safeguard will be the courts. If at the end of all this process, a member of the public is not happy about it, the member of the public can actually go to court, challenge that legislation, and there have been instances where such legislations have been declared unconstitutional. So there are enough safeguards within our constitutional architecture to ensure that if a legislation is passed, there's citizen participation or public participation.
So in the case of BBI then being nullified by the courts, Salem, it is the citizen going to court and say such and such a bill is unconstitutional, and the judges found it that way.
Yes, and
we are talking about.
Yes, and that is what the Constitution provides. That it is Parliament can enact legislation, but that legislation can actually be challenged in courts of law, and a citizen can actually institute a petition before court, so that now the courts can interrogate all those issues. So to me, the way I look at it, there will be the Parliament's role, and Parliament will ensure that it adheres to what the Constitution provides and the acts of Parliament, their rules of procedure, and so on. But now the courts will have the final say about that. Going back to the BBI, since it's a matter before court, I will not want really to comment on that. But I just want to say that at the end of it, Parliament will ensure that in enacting that legislation, it adheres to the Constitution.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jackson Madalu says, wonderful program. Silas Mbugo is asking, where does the public participation happen? Because maybe he hasn't come across a public participation. I know it's usually put in the Kenya Gazette. Okay, Bernard Ongijo says, I'm watching through a bit of noise at the background. I don't know which noise is coming from. Maybe it's from your gadget, because here it's very quiet, Bernard. Silas Bugwe says, is there a threshold in terms of number of people participating in each county? Still on the matters of public participation, that I would like you to come into that as we finish. Anna Musandu Jobi says, very informative, Salem Lorot, demystifying a lot of issues. And Caroline Wanga said, clarify the role of activists in this country. And to me, I think activists fall as citizens. They're representatives of the citizens. So to say, even the people who took the bill, to court, the issue of the constitutional amendment bill to court, they are activists, most of them. But Salem, time is not enough, and I know for the sake of our viewers, we will be doing this same discussion in Swahili on Thursday. So you can join us on Nasaza Uongozi, 8:30 on Thursday for this candid discussion, and maybe we can even go beyond what we have just covered today. But in a nutshell, as we conclude, where does public participation happen? And
thank you.
Cutting short at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Public participation happens at different levels.
Yes.
It happens, and this is something that is well known to the members of public right now.
Yes.
Where a bill has been read the first time, and it's due for second reading. So once it has been read the first time, it will be submitted to the relevant committee, parliamentary committee. And that committee, while it will be considering it, it will invite the members of the public through various ways. One of them will be through an advert in the newspapers. Other ways will be by holding a baraza somewhere, holding a town hall meeting or a baraza under a tree, and collect those views. So it usually happens at that time. You'll find, for instance, a parliamentary committee might go to a certain county and invite them to submit their comments on a particular bill. So if that opportunity arises, then that is actually public participation at that level. And then in terms of the number of counties, the law does not prescribe, or the number of views, that the law does not prescribe that. What is important is that even when you're submitting your comments, you have to indicate whether you support that bill or you do not support it. But if you are against it, it's important to give your reasons. And if you are proposing certain amendments, you actually specify which amendments you wish to be to reflect in that bill.
Thank you very much, Salem. I think time is up. We thank you, everyone who engaged us in this wonderful, candid discussion today, discussing about leadership and the law. And I guess the public really need to know about leadership and the law and how the whole process of leadership needs to connect in understanding the rule of law and making sure you follow it. Some of you guys are leaders in your own rights, and maybe you're going to become leaders tomorrow in political position or corporate or anywhere. And you need to understand this so that you can be able to understand that the law is there to safeguard us and not really to destroy us. So thank you very much, Salem, for joining us. The Raw Leadership Talk is brought to you by the Africa Center for Public Speaking, and right now we are actually doing an intake for the Professional Speakers Course June class that is supposed to commence on the 21st. And you can enroll for this particular program to master your communication skills to where you can become effective in this, or leadership development program or mentality change program. I welcome you to visit our website with the numbers that are passing on the screen. The website is there. Welcome, visit us and engage us for further discussions of our program. God bless you and see you next time.
Thank you.